Estamos hoje aqui com o Chris Crowley para bater um papo sobre a nossa aula de SOC. Nada melhor do que a pessoa, né? A pessoa que conduz esse tema dentro do SANS e conduziu inúmeras entrevistas sobre SOC, mundo afora, dando aulas e consultoria. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here today. Talk a little bit about this subject that I know that you like a lot and I like it a lot. So let's chit chat a little bit about SOC and the Operations Center, okay?
Sounds great.
Please let the public know who is this Chris Crowley that everybody knows about on Twitter and LinkedIn.
So you know, I mean, I'm just a regular guy. I do a bunch of security related work. I've been working in security for a while. I've been working in computers for a really long time. When I was a kid, I used to run tape backup at a business down the street from where I grew up. It was kind of an interesting place, actually. They did integrated circuit software. It was actually an open source project with universities in Massachusetts. And I was in high school and pretty young. I mean, this was in the 80s. And so it's like, you know, they basically had a project where the state funded some people to develop this software, but then they also had a photolithography facility, so they could actually make one-off chips for students who were doing hardware engineering, right? And so I basically worked with all these like super geeks. I mean, this was like, you know, back in the 80s, the people who were working in computers were really hardcore geeks, a bunch of software developers. So that's kind of how I got started in computers when I was younger, and I've been doing stuff in one way or another for a long time related to that. I've done a lot of operational work. In sort of around 2000, 2002, I started ending up dealing with a bunch of incidents and problems. And that's really when I started getting involved in the security aspect of stuff, mostly just out of necessity. Like our computers were getting compromised, things were a problem, spam was a problem, there's all this stuff, and we just had to make it work. So I've been working for U.S. government agencies for a couple of years. I've been doing stuff at Department of Defense, and this is kind of an extension of me leaving New Orleans and moving to Washington D.C. in that time frame in the early 2000s. And then I started doing some work for SANS Institute. I started taking classes. Actually, the first class that I took for SANS Institute technically was Hal Pomerantz's Unix security, because I was actually managing AIX, Solaris systems, BSD systems. I was doing just like network operations on a bunch of different Unix type things. So I took that class. I just got the books. I didn't even show up. The company I worked for was really cheap, you know, so they just they're like, well, you can get the books. So I did that. And I mean, it's just like, since then I've worked in a lot of different places, and over time what I've realized is that there needs to be this like convergence of doing stuff from an operational perspective. Just about me personally, you know, before we get into like the stuff about SOCs and generally, like I'm a very procedural person in terms of the way that I do stuff. And I had always done systems administration and network engineering and network administration. And I've always thought of like, let's just get the computers to do that and make them do the work. So my approach to a lot of things is let's program it, let's make it work, and so on. And when I started having to do analytical work in the security space, it was less procedural and more of like, hey, let's figure this out. This is a real problem, and get and gain knowledge. And so that's actually what really let me continue down into the security stuff. Is it's not about just like knowing it. It's not just writing the script. It's more about there's actually a lot of unknown, and we need to figure something out and do the best thing in that particular circumstance. So that's a little bit about me. I don't want to talk about me all night, but a little bit of background. Like, who is this guy that's, why should I trust his opinion? Why should I trust the stuff that he's talking about?
You don't need to do that. Everybody knows Chris' opinions and understanding about the SOC aspect, but this is very nice to know about your background and everything else. This is quite interesting because I think that most of the SOC guys today started in the past as Unix system administrators, right? It's very common
very
mindset
common.
and very common aspect on SOC operations perspective. And you said something very, very unique, I think, at least in my opinion, that is the procedural mindset. This is very, very, very interesting for SOC operations, because some people think that SOC operations is only to have a very large number or very smart people figuring out the problems, but they forgot to have procedures. They forgot to have process. And I think this is very critical aspect on SOC operations nowadays, because the problem is getting bigger, they're getting worse. The alerts are in a huge number, actually, every day. So most of people forget about process procedures that can help them to have their very focused on what is really critical for minds thinking, for example.
Yeah. And let's make it better. You know, if we don't have a way to capture stuff for the things that really are overloading us, let's make it better. And then we can deal with hard problems. Because most people that I talk to, they just feel overwhelmed by so many things. And it's usually the repetition of the same thing and not being able to figure it out. And so then there's that opportunity to capture that is really what we want to go for.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think, Chris, about SOC being considered as a security aspect mainstream nowadays, right? So I remember a little bit in the past, every time that we look at and said someone, oh, I'm working at the SOC or I'm creating the SOC, most of people ask, what you're talking about? SOC, what is SOC? And I don't have no idea what a SOC does and the actually daily operations perspective. But nowadays we have seen SOC as mainstream subject in the newspaper and TV, radio, and a lot of, you can see at the LinkedIn jobs, you can see jobs related to SOC operation all over the world right now. So
yeah, and you know, I think that what has happened, it used to be like you have to have an emergency response team, and you know, it's like I think that the naming has kind of transformed over a period of years. But in my opinion, what has happened is that there's been enough problems that really haven't been resolved, where it's like, what's going on? Why can't we fix these issues? Right. And again, sort of like my frame around this is that all information systems, because of the way that we choose to deploy them and the way that they're built, all information systems are flawed in some way. Right. And then we let people install whatever software they want on it and they don't keep it up. And so it's like, this is a real issue. But the reason why I think SOC is becoming far more mainstream or acceptable to like spend the money on doing this is that it's turned into something where enough organizations and enough people actually are really feeling the pain of information systems having problems. And what organizations have come to realize is that they need this capability, not on an occasional basis, but like this is day in and day out. You just need it nonstop. And usually funding for the security operations went into places where they got compromised really early on. Right. So over the last kind of like 10 years, as this has become much more prevalent, the places that got popped early, somebody in the organization said, never again. We don't want it to happen. Make it so that we never have that terrible experience. And go look at, you know, like some of the big ones recently, like a Maersk kind of place where they just got obliterated. I mean, just absolutely eviscerated and destroyed in terms of the intrusion. You think that Maersk wants to go through that again?
You're talking about the hands-on incident, right? And
yeah,
not
like
PTI incident.
and not even a near miss. Like these places that have had SOCs for a long time, or that now they're like, we're spending the money, they got hurt. Like it hurt, you know, and a lot of times that's what it took for organizations to decide that they're going to build this thing up. And then enough entities saw that. And so imagine that like one of the information sharing groups, like an ISAC, like the financial ISAC, imagine hearing from somebody else in a different company talking about an intrusion that just absolutely tore them apart from the inside and all the money that they lost. Like, you think that's going to make a difference to your decision makers if you can actually share that story? Like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. And so it's like, there's just enough visibility on that pain. I think that people are doing this, and that's why it's becoming far more prevalent. The other thing is there are more people who are able to do the work now. You know, 15 years ago, go look and try and hire people for a SOC. There just weren't people, right? I mean, it just didn't exist. And so over time, the people available has also made it so that you can do something about it. Because, you know, I mean, for you, for me, 15, 20 years ago, like you're just figuring it out, like whatever, whatever you have at your disposal. Now you have tremendous amounts of tools. You have a lot of information. You have people sharing things. You have people talking about different techniques. You've got repositories where you can go and find a whole bunch of stuff already developed, ready to go, related to security operations. There's stuff where it's like you got images that are pre-built that already have security engineered and architected into them. That's great. You know, but then I can actually turn it into like, okay, now this makes sense. I can get some people involved and have it make sense. Otherwise, so we got some Unix graybeards in the basement who are like, you know, like they're the ones that figure it out. We don't know. We just,
it worked for some while, right? But probably not anymore.
No, not so much anymore.
Yeah, I see. I feel you. So I can capture here. You talk about three little aspects that are very critical, right? First is pain. Pain is still a very important issue in the security operation perspective, right? Most of the people learn from pain, and this continues to be very more learning method than the prevention, right? So there's a big issue. But when it comes to prevention, you said that the sharing information is very useful and tends to support a little bit about the decision, right? So SIs or ITIs or any other institute that have information sharing regarding incidents or situations, that can help a lot. So this is very important too. Here in Brazil, unfortunately, we haven't so much. I know that we have, in financial perspective, we have an information sharing group, and pretty much that, you know. We don't have right now still for telecommunications or IT operations, or even for engineering or factory, for instance, because we are having a lot of new issues considered to these kind of companies and this kind of IT and operational perspective, right? We have very recently, today, we got a notice from Florida, right? That someone hacked in the water.
Saw that,
yeah, this is very critical stuff.
Frightening.
Very frightening, because it's no longer about computers. It's now for a human behavior, human life, right? So this is getting very critical, very annoying for us as well. Nice. So how does the SOC survey help companies or helping countries to understand a little bit? Because as we are talking about, most of sharing information can support, and I find SOC survey very useful for sharing information as well.
Good.
Right. So understand a little bit what is working on other countries, other companies, other perspectives. So tell me a little bit about the SOC survey.
Yeah, happy to. So I actually wrote the 2020 SOC survey, and I wrote the SANS Institute 2017, 2018, and 2019 SOC surveys. So I've been writing this SOC survey in some form for 4 years, right? Now, let me just start off with the idea of what a survey is, because, it's important to study what other people are doing. Okay. But still, this is just somebody's opinion. This is not the official representation. This is
Of
not
course,
like
yeah,
a real like scientific assessment. I have a background in, scientific type investigation work. This is not me being able to use an objective study, objective measurement even. This is me asking people what their opinion is. Now, there's tremendous value in that. But I also want to make sure that we understand, like, this is not me going in and doing like a thorough investigation and audit of, 100 SOCs. This is me asking people, hey, would you share information? And actually, first of all, I'm really appreciative of the people who took the time to respond to the survey. I mean, I would estimate it probably took an hour to like sit down and actually answer the questions. And people are taking the time out of their day to do this. I probably estimate I spent a couple hundred hours actually making this survey, right? I mean, and I've done stuff in the past, but I built all the things to ask the questions. At one point, I actually I had all the questions that I had rewritten. I had a buddy of mine, I paid him to put the stuff into the Google Forms because I just wasn't getting to it. I was like, I have to push this out. This has to happen. It's like the timing of things are right. And then I actually did a lot of analysis around it. And this year, I did all the analysis in Python. And something that I truly believe in is sharing the methods of analysis. And for me, this is kind of like, if I wanted to be as close to math or science or whatever as possible, I need to share how I came to the things that I came to. Okay. So for the survey, in spite of the fact that I think it's not truly a measurement, it's not like a physical property that we can measure, I do think that this particular survey has a lot of integrity around it, and it has good history around it. And the people who responded, I think, are real people with real, information that they're sharing. I look at some surveys sometimes and I'm like, that's maybe like 20 people. I mean, I can put a poll online somewhere. I can put a poll on Twitter, and it's a total echo chamber of the people that are looking at that right now. Now, that's one of the problems with this survey. And, like as we were talking about this, you have some stuff about, what does this tell us about, Latin America? And honestly, the survey that I wrote doesn't have a lot of information that I can drill down on Latin America. Now, there is some, and there is some focus on that, but largely the demographic is headquartered out of North America, right? And again, this is more a representation of me,
of course,
on the one hand, of like the context that I have. On the other hand, I think that by talking about this and sharing this with people, it actually gives an opportunity for more people to participate in this. Because we have a real problem in this space where, like, we don't really have a population that we can point to and say with certainty there are X number of SOCs in the world. Right. And so one of the things that I really tried to do in this is just get a sense of, what do the people who responded to the survey think a SOC is? And there's a question, and again, we'll get into the report and talk about this, but there are a whole bunch of questions that I asked around capabilities. And so the capabilities, I talk about things like, does your SOC offer architectural services? Do you offer digital forensics? Do you do pen testing? Right. And so this is helping to get a picture of what makes a security operations center, so we have some sort of a consensus definition. So that's really my objective for the SOC survey, is to make it so that as objective as I possibly can be, there's information that then gets reshared back out to the community that helps to drive this maturity for everybody, so that there is some reference. And again, just a personal story I've heard over and over again over the last few years. People will say to me, you know what? Thank you for writing that survey, because I took that survey and I talked to my boss about that survey. Right. And I have had
This is
people
very
say, I was able to
useful.
hire two new staff members because
Yeah,
of that
yeah.
survey, right?
This is useful for the subject
Yeah,
itself, you know.
yeah.
So as you said, besides you don't have pretty much Latin American participants to the survey, that is a very important point for me, at least. I have this very clear. Maybe Latin America are not understanding yet what is a SOC, what is the complexity to operating a SOC. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe my question, right? So why we don't have pretty much information between Latin American SOCs on the global SOC survey? One, maybe we don't have SOCs at all, very few number.
Yeah, it's a valid
Maybe
hypothesis. Yeah.
one of the hypotheses. Another hypothesis, our SOC are very low mature. They don't know there exists such kind of survey that can help
Mm.
them
Mm-hmm.
to validate a little bit what they are doing.
Yeah.
So this is a very useful information for me as a Latin American operator, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is very, very clear non-information, but information for me.
Of course.
To have no or few Latin American respondents is a very useful information for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you talk a very critical point, right? The SOC buzzword and actually SOC capabilities, because every time we talk about SOC here in Latin America, for instance, we have a lot of very different aspects that people think that SOC does.
Yep.
There are some people that think that SOC is only prevention technology, like operating firewalls, operating IPS, antivirus, etc. And there are totally different aspects that SOC is only monitoring and detection aspect.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
In your survey, I can see that we have all of things that considered as SOC operations, right, including pen testing. So this is very, very interesting aspect.
Yeah, let me share again, it's not the survey exactly, but let me share my thoughts on what makes a SOC.
Please.
And so like I have this, and I have a class that I teach on this that is like intended to either help people to build a SOC from nothing, or to let people basically think about, hey, here's what I have, let me compare it to what Chris is talking about and glean that sort of information. And a lot of people ask me the question in the form of, what is the minimum that I need to make a SOC? And honestly, I hate that line of thinking. I don't like that line of thinking, because the approach that I take is, let me give you the full architecture. Okay. And then after you listen to me saying what that architecture is composed of, then you decide, what does your organization need and what can your organization afford to do right now and in the future? So I talk, I try to draw analogies to explain things, but it's kind of like the Security Operations Center is a house. Okay. There's certain things that are expected in a modern house. Like I would expect to have running water and electricity. Do I need running water and electricity in a house? Technically, no, and it still counts for a house. But like there's certain things that I just have as an expectation, right? The local building codes may also dictate that when I build a house, like I lived in New Orleans for a long time, I need to install hurricane clips, because when the wind comes through, it's going to tear the roof off if you don't build it to the right sort of threats, right? If I'm in a, so there are all these sort of local variations. I can't possibly know all the local variations for every single business, but let me explain the full set of systems, and then you decide, what do I need to customize? You know what? You might not be able to afford some of this stuff, and that's just the reality too, right? You do what you can do, knowing that these other things are there, but you just can't achieve that yet. Okay. So let me list out what I think is like the full picture of what Security Operations Center needs to be. First of all, I label this as the notion of a steering committee. Now, a steering committee is basically our customers, whoever we're intended to protect. And if you're a managed security service provider, you have some way to interact with your customers. But a lot of people who work inside of an organization lose sight of the fact that they truly have customers who they're protecting. Like that's their work. That's what they do, right? So I say customers or constituents or whatever, but it's a steering
stakeholders,
committee.
right?
Stakeholders. Perfect. Yeah, that's another really good term. Who are our
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders? Who are the people that we're providing this service to? Let's make sure we have a dialogue with them on an ongoing basis, and some mechanism, some way that we've decided and agreed to. I give you metrics. You tell me information about changes that you're making on your IT systems. Like, here are the topics. This is the currency of our exchange. That's what our steering committee provides. Next thing is what I call a command center function, which is basically like somebody needs to answer the phone. Somebody needs to send the email. Somebody needs to make sure that we're going to meet our service level objective. All that kind of like administrative overhead watching. Somebody needs to do that. And in a small SOC with a few people, whoever's turn it is right now, that's who's doing it. But in a bigger SOC, you could build this out to a group of people that's all that they do. Right? Monitoring, as you mentioned, right? The ability to monitor our networks to see that we have a problem. Just an absolute necessary core functional capability of security operations. Incident response. When there's a problem, we need to do something about it. Now, some people separate incident response from monitoring or whatever. Again, if you want to make this work efficiently and have it be operational, it really is part of the same machine, where if you separated this unit and that unit, okay, but still, like, this unit has to talk to that unit. They have to make sense. They have to share information. Yeah, it's important. So I put it into security operations because it's part of what it's going to do. Monitoring without being able to respond. Hey, we have a serious problem, and we're just going to sit here and do nothing about it.
It's better to not detect at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably. So threat intelligence, right? Threat intelligence for me is both the absorbing information from the outside and production of threat intelligence and sharing it with other people. Now, you may not be able to share it with everybody publicly, but threat intelligence, I want the SOC thinking about developing threat intelligence, using threat intelligence, and having actions based on information that's relevant and topical and appropriate for what they have. Forensic analysis is the deep dive kind of authoritative inspection, right? I mean, and I might have to outsource any of these parts. Forensics is one that I, may need to outsource, but I want to have the ability to say, I can assess information assets at a very deep and thorough level and come up with good answers. Otherwise, people are just guessing, and I don't want it. And then I lump a lot of other things into the idea of self-assessment. Self-assessment being that pen testing, vulnerability management, baseline development, app whitelisting, all of that capability. Plus, I think that the Security Operations Center needs to practice a lot. Like, we won't get good at being a SOC unless we have things to practice. And most of what we do in the SOC is we're looking at a tremendous amount of information and we're speculating if there's a problem. If we want to get closer to having confidence in our ability to identify problems in an unknown set of information, I want to have some cases where I can say, well, we found the one that we know we should find, at least. And so this idea of building a little bit of self exercise and testing in is really powerful because it drives confidence. And I mean, I don't expect people to be 100% in a SOC. I really don't. I would like them to be, but I just don't expect it yet. But if I want to get closer to 100%, I need to be able to say, like, I compromised that computer on purpose and my SOC over there found it. Right. And if I can do that all the time, and, I'm putting in a little bit of signal that I know that they should find, and I can say with confidence that they find it 90% of the times, I can express confidence. Otherwise, how do I even know? Like, how do I know?
I will only know after we have an incident, right? So
Yeah.
the problem is every time that we have an incident, we think our SOC is not useful at all. But we're not counting the time that maybe we prevented, maybe we detected.
Yeah.
But I think that you're talking about a very important thing that is quality control and quality assurance, right? On the SOC process and operation. And most of the time that I'm seeing SOC overall around, we have a lot of effort on operational perspective that we forget to have this kind of control, right? The quality control, we can call this nowadays as adversarial simulation, purple teaming, whatever the name is. This is quality control process, right? And quality assurance process.
Yeah, it is. There's a certain quality aspect that we need to make sure. And I personally tend to avoid the quality control, quality assurance, just and talk about confidence. I think it's a more appropriate term for us, because in quality control, I can say, this object is supposed to be, exactly 2.78 centimeters long, and it's 2.79 centimeters long. So we have a problem with our machine over there and we need to fix it. And I can say, this is exactly what it needs to be. But when I'm dealing with active adversaries who have their own choice, they have their own ability, they can build tools, they can bring stuff to my environment that I don't know what it is. What is it?
There's no exactly, right? There's
no
what
is quality
situation. Right?
Yeah. And so we use metrics to talk about this, but in terms of this, I tend to talk about it with the idea of confidence, because confidence says, I don't have certainty, but I'm able to say that we can probably do this well. And I'm not afraid of saying that because I'm confident. Right. So that's the term that I tend to use for this. And again, we're not, like, I've kind of departed from the survey a little bit, but I use the survey to inform my thoughts on how to run a SOC. And, I work with people, in various places. I'm working with a small MSSP currently that has some pretty big customers, and they're really trying to drive maturity very quickly right now. And so this is the strategy that we're using for that. It's like, let's just build confidence. Let's show the stuff that we can do, the stuff that we are concerned that we can't do it. Let's do it better and figure out how to make it work. So that's the kind of iterative approach that a lot of SOCs end up taking. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And regarding the survey, what do you think about the strategy and business perspective on having a SOC, or onboarding a SOC in internal operation, or to having the SOC as outside as some external service? What do you think about those aspects?
Yeah. So in the survey, there was a bunch of stuff that was actually outsourced, and I could pull up the specific details of what a lot of people outsource. But generally, rather than me looking at the chart, generally, organizations have a tendency to outsource pen testing, forensic analysis, threat intelligence. Right? These are very common things for them to outsource. My opinion around all this is, any portion of those functions, you could outsource it effectively. What's really important, though, is you understand what you're buying and you understand your responsibility in buying that service. 24/7 monitoring, very commonly outsourced. And sincerely, I think that that's going to be outsourced even more by organizations over the next couple of years. Right? I think it's going to be so much more difficult for organizations to make sense of what they're even ingesting from a monitoring perspective. So they're going to turn to service providers, security service providers, who are basically going to say, we've already got a portfolio for instrumenting your Azure Active Directory thing. And so we'll just put all these rules in place. It costs you X dollars a month to be able to pull this data. We have analysts who are going to look at it. We have use cases that are already built. boom, you're done. You've got your cloud offering. If you have internal stuff, you can feed this into our resource too. It's so hard to maintain 24/7 visibility on stuff that I think that the monitoring aspect is another one that a lot of people actually find a very high value proposition in outsourcing.
I see.
The organizations who aren't outsourcing that aspect are the ones who have sensitivity around the data that they have on their systems going to a third party.
I see. So they are more worried with the data and the information perspective, confidentiality, etc. They actually than the operations perspective, right? So they prefer to build all capabilities internally than offering that to a third party.
That's my generalization in terms of the organizations that are really like inclined to only doing it internally. The other part of this is that many organizations in the survey, it actually says this. We asked the question like, do you outsource? Do you just have it internally, or do you do both? Right. And so I think that there's actually a value proposition to doing both, where you've got people inside who are doing some stuff, and then you find a company that's good in a way that matches what you want to do, then you hire that company to do it. And that's really, I think, the people who are doing a good job sort of spending their money well, leveraging their resources well, being economical. I think that they're the ones who have a pretty clear vision of what they want, and then they go and shop around for a technically compatible company, right? They're using the same SIM or SOAR tool or whatever sort of tooling that we're using. And they have a similar approach to the mindset of how we do stuff, right? And frankly, some companies, they kind of just need to check the box of compliance, and that's why they have a SOC.
Unfortunately, but it happens a lot.
Yeah, but I'd rather there be laws that force that, and we at least have that.
Yeah.
Right. Then there not be laws and people not do that. Right?
Exactly. That's
so the next level up from that is, again, like once you're seeing that and you're like, well, what are we doing about that? How are we making this work? What do we do once we find an alert? That's when things start to turn more into the learning stock. I actually, for some businesses, they will not spend a penny more than they're required to spend on security. And I can see that. I can understand that from an organizational perspective of like, look, I can spend money on a new machine over here to be able to build more of the stuff that I sell faster, or I can spend money over here on loss prevention for something that I don't really know is going to affect us. I mean, if I'm being a business person, I would spend the money on the machine that I can build more of the stuff that I sell. Right.
Yeah, this is totally aligned with that kind of aspect and concept about the return of investment, right? The ROI. And this is every time that they talk about security for business, most of the business people, first question will be, okay, what's the return of that investment? And most of time, almost 100%, we don't freaking know. We don't have a freaking idea what should be that ROI. And it probably will not know that in later years or so also. So I'm pretty understand this kind of aspect, but we at least should have some kind of idea or metric or measure. How can we show to the business what they are paying for? In previous, you comment, for instance, your house that you are building in your links, regarding to the rooftop, right? The roof. This is threat modeling.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
This is threat modeling. You know what kind of threat you have, and you should understand a little bit about what kind of controls, aspects, operations that you need to build. So maybe the best way to inform what they are paying for is threat modeling, to have a very clear understanding what's the threat and what's the cost to have that kind of control for that threat. You know?
Yeah, another way that you can talk about a financial aspect of Security Operations Center is loss prevention. So what you can say is, let's agree upon some dollar value. It would be as accurate as possible if you can like tabulate the cost associated with a cybersecurity incident that they needed to do incident response on. Right. But if you don't have that from inside of the organization, you can speculate, say, okay, we have one compromised computer, we need to mobilize a number of resources. If we have on-premises people ready to go to do incident response, that costs us X amount over a year. If we don't have those people on site and I need to contact, an incident response company and build a contract under stress and in the moment, it's going to cost us this, right? Then you could also go to that company and say, well, what do you see related to your experience with organizations who have monitoring versus don't have monitoring, right? And so the industry information basically says catching it early tends to diminish the impact of an incident. And so you can talk about the cost of handling, but then you can also talk about the cost of the incident and the impact of that incident. So speculating on loss prevention is actually another way that you can talk about value. If someone asks me, what's the return on investment? I say zero, in fact, less than zero. I'm sorry I can't sell this to you, but I'm just being too honest, right? Right. It's like, that's way too honest, because for me, what's the return on investment? I put $1,000 into Bitcoin today. I want it to be worth $1,500 tomorrow. That's a return on investment. 50% one day, boom, I got 50% return. Like, that's a return. Building security operations, like, I don't get money back, right? I don't get money back. What I get is less damage when things start to go off the rail, right?
Avoiding money to flow, right? Probably. So probably in this kind of aspect, a business impact analysis will support a lot, right? If the company does have a business impact report, we can use the business impact report and compare the cost of the operation, the SOC operation, or the operations cost itself. So maybe we can have a very clear money
I think that's a reasonable
metric, right?
Yeah. Another thing that you can do with that, in terms of the depiction of the costs associated with Security Operations Center, is basically look at the loss that the organization might actually have, and you can compare that to other breaches and incidents which have occurred. Say, here's the thing that happened to, Equifax. Here's the thing that happened to FireEye. Here's the thing that happened to this other company, and here's the damage that they incurred related to that particular intrusion, right? The other part of this that you can also say, which is some potential value that security operations can provide, is long-term protection of the investment that the company is making in their information assets. Okay, so again, even for places that it's like, this is a manufacturing line, we just build a thing. It's like, well, that could have unwanted interruptions. That could have a product which is purchased and brought in, which actually causes disruptions, which can't be updated in the future, which goes out of, it's kind of like goes out of support very quickly. If your security operations is tuned to some of the architectural aspects, and that inclusion in the portfolio of information systems, the SOC can help the company to avoid making bad decisions. right? And this is something that I talk to any place that has even a burgeoning, a startup of a threat intelligence program. One of the things that I say is, I need you to talk to some of the people who are just running the business, who have computers that they're using to run their business. And I need you to talk to them about things that they're afraid of affecting the business from a competitive perspective, right? And I need you to go look in the intelligence that you have and see if there are things that might affect the organization, because the organization is going to be far more interested in your technical explanation of why you need to apply this patch or that patch if you can explain it in the context of how it's affecting other businesses in the same market sector where you're working.
I see.
Yeah, the
This is
business is
context,
gonna,
right?
yeah,
This
yeah,
is security in context. It's
yes,
not security itself, right?
yeah. Don't try to make people afraid. Just be like, look,
Yeah.
this is a thing that can go bad. You also mentioned the business impact analysis. Another thing that because I work with lots of different places, and it's like I talk to people. Another thing that I like to start with in the conversation is, do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you have a business continuity plan? Just from like an availability perspective, what do you care about? Like, what systems are the ones that have been around for a long time that you have focused on? Because that's what the attacker is going
crowd
to care
jury,
about.
right?
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
the crowd jury? The business crowd jury, right?
Yeah. And I can learn that without having to ask them to do a whole bunch of other stuff if I
Sure.
just, have the ability to have that conversation around things like disaster recovery plans.
Okay.
So let me
Nice.
mention one other thing quickly about disaster recovery. I lived in New Orleans, and this is why I mentioned hurricane clips. I lived in New Orleans until 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. I was working for Tulane University at the time. Basically, all of our computers, every single one, was knocked offline by Hurricane Katrina. And our entire data center, and this was 15 years ago, so there wasn't a lot of like cloud computing type stuff. Yahoo was one of the big cloud companies. Put it in perspective, they're still around, but they're not really like the email giant that they were 15, 20 years ago. And so I went through a major disaster. Fortunately, our data center was not destroyed, but because of some things, we didn't have electricity to our data center for about 30 days. And so I went through this. We relocated physically and had to deal with a whole bunch of stuff. And we pretty much had to reconstruct a whole bunch of things. And it was really interesting to me. And it's a lesson that, of course, I'll never forget. This was a huge impact on me personally and for tens of thousands of people that I worked with, affected them. But the reality of this is there were really only a couple of systems that we needed to be available right away. You know what the number one system was for us that we needed to be available right away? The payroll system on our mainframe to be able to pay people. And when I hear people talk about 5 nines of availability and all this other stuff, I always reflect on that. I'm like, I don't know, like maybe you have a business reason for that, but I don't know. Like if we tore everything down and we shut all the computers off, which ones do you really need?
What's the first, right?
Yeah,
if you need to
right
rebuild everything
now.
from down, what's
right
the
now.
first, right? What's the first one?
Yeah, right
Okay,
now.
so,
and some businesses truly understand that, and some businesses do not have a clue. Do not have a clue what that is. Okay. And again, it's not until you feel that pain sometimes that you actually learn what's important. And that's
learning from pain, unfortunately, again, right?
I don't, I don't like that, but unfortunately, that's what it seems like a lot of people go through in order to learn this stuff. It would be better if we learned from other people's pain.
Exactly. This is threat intelligent mindset and modeling, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly the threat intelligence mindset is don't let it happen to us. Learn from the other people who made the mistakes. Learn from the other people who got targeted first. And let's use that to guide us. And that's another way that you can talk to people about what security operations can do for you. It's this threat-informed monitoring to avoid things really getting to be problems.
Excellent, excellent. And talking a little bit about the people-centric perspective, right, on the security operation. And nowadays we are talking very much about the skill gap, right? Another buzzword, but in fact, this is kind of interesting because you said that today we have a little bit more manpower for SOC operation than we have in the past. But at the same time, we have facing the cyber skill gap because most of these effort are not very skilled. We have a lot of people, but not a lot of skills, right? Talking a little bit about this issue.
Yeah. So first of all, in the survey, basically ask the question like, how many people do you have in your SOC? And most people who answered, and this isn't saying that all SOCs are about this size, but most people who answered, it's kind of in about the 10 people range. Okay. I asked a little further, it's split between like junior staff, monitoring staff, threat intelligence staff. Not a lot of people have like dedicated threat intelligence. This is something that a lot of people are using kind of a strategy of like, well, this is Chris over here and Chris does monitoring and Chris does incident response and Chris does threat intelligence and Chris does forensics. And, you know, that happens. And so the thing about the skill gap is we do not have hundreds of years of experience like the medical community has, like physical engineering has. We don't have, you know, decades of experience like electrical engineering has. So even though we've got a lot of stuff that we can go to, this cybersecurity thing, still really, really new. So the people who enter into this space need to have sort of this sense of, I'm going to figure it out, right? But there also really needs to be some professionalism in that. And I think that in the Security Operations Center, the best way, in my opinion, to try to develop that professionalism is to have a team strategy for performing analysis, right? And you know, I talk about Richards J. Hauer and analysis of competing hypotheses and that stuff. That's not the only one, but something where all of the people who are in the SOC can say, here's how we make decisions around things that we don't truly and completely understand. Some methodology. Okay. Now, you know, in places like Brazil, right? I've never been. I'm looking forward to coming. You know, it's carnival next week. So I'm right. So
it's not a good time, you know. At the
I know it's not a good time right now, but anyway, at some point in the future, I've heard great things. But here's something that I've heard in this space around cybersecurity and stuff. And this is, again, limited perspective. My understanding about Brazil is Brazil has really good hackers.
Yep.
Brazil has really good hackers. What makes a good computer hacker? It's someone who's curious, who has a good background in math, usually, who has that kind of like analytical mindset, but who's also is just like very aggressive at accomplishing specific objectives. That's what makes a really good hacker. Someone who's like, I'm not going to do all this other stuff. I'm going there. Like, that's where I'm going straight away. Right. And so what's interesting about that is if I think about what that mindset might look like for the people who are in defense, the prevailing thing that I want out of people who are in defense from a mindset perspective. Forget about skills or technical knowledge. Like I can train all that stuff. The thing that I want is people to be intellectually honest about the things that they're looking at, because they're looking at a lot of unknown stuff. And I don't want them to fool themselves into missing things, because defenders need to be kind of this like very observant individual who also knows when to switch off that observation and just hammer down on something and be like, boom, this needs to happen right now. Okay. So this sort of like analytical mindset is important for defenders. But the problem is, because we're asking them to have that very responsive thing, what we're actually mistraining them to do, it's the wrong thing, is to force them to jump to conclusions, right?
I see.
I don't want defenders jumping to conclusions anymore. I want them being analytical so that they can support why they think what they think, because that's going to drive that overall engine of making everything better. Because the next time, if the person's just responding and thinking, well, then they don't know how to do that more effectively the next time. If they're a little bit more analytical in their inspection of the information, then they're going to actually be able to next time give themselves a little bit more pause and say, this would be better. Rather than me doing this thing, I'm going to do this other thing because that's better, right? So I think that beyond the skill gap, there's this whole mental framework that we're not telling people is the right thing. And what we do is we take junior level analysts and throw them in front of a monitor and say, find bad stuff. And we make them do it until they're.
And we push them, right? And we push them a lot.
You know, like they can't even see anymore. Have you ever sat in front of a monitor for 10 hours and tried to make sense of complicated information? It's really hard. It's really hard. I used to manage a 24/7 team. I used to manage this 24/7 team, and I would go down to the analysts who were like looking at the monitors, and I'd just be like, hey, stand up and go for a little walk for 5 or 10 minutes. Those monitors will be there when you come back. You know, I want you to be attentive. I want you to be thinking. I want you to make critically important decisions for our organization. It's
not about being the eyes, but being the brain, right?
Exactly. That's a great way of saying it. It's not about being just eyes. It's about being the brain. You, as an analyst, a monitoring analyst, are making a critically important decision on behalf of the organization. This is where we need to look more. This is where we need to react now. Right. And if we decide to react to this thing right now, it kind of makes it so we can't react to other stuff for a little while. If we're going to strike, if we're going to act, we better do it in the right time. And that means that you have a little bit of time to make the decision. You have that time to make that decision, but we don't usually tell our monitoring analysts that.
I think that is a big issue right now, right? Because we are not only SOC operations, but whole security perspective. We are focusing training skills and hard skills. But we are losing the soft skills. Everything that you said right now is soft skills, right? Is teaching people how to think. Is teaching people how to analyze. Teaching people how to they can do the feed forward information, right? The moving information from a rational perspective, but feeding back information as well. So how can do better? How can go information back to other teams so they can do better with their process and their information? I think most of the problems that I'm seeing in SOC nowadays, they focus a lot on feed forward, and they forget the feedback. They forget the feedback to process. They forget the feedback to people. They forget to feedback to company. You know, so I totally agree with you. Maybe this is we need to move along with the skill training and to focus on people training, right?
Mm-hmm.
Human perspective, to treat analysts as humans before treating them as analysts.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I actually have a totally different talk that I gave at EDUCAUSE
Mm-hmm.
early in 2020 about my sort of program of training within a security operations center. And it's kind of funny. I did a 20-minute version, 25-minute version for the EDUCAUSE presentation. And then when I just let myself have as much time to talk about it, it's like an hour and 40 minutes long of me talking about how I think we should be training our analysts. And a lot of it's technical. And the idea of feedback and the communication, I think that the language for an analyst is actually a programming language. Like this is the way that you build stuff in the long term, right? This is a way that you create things. Being able to script, being able to program, being able to do data analysis, being able to do this um, on a long-term project basis, on an immediate as needed basis, really important. And maybe I'm a little skewed. I've been working in scripting languages since I was 15 years old, right? So it's like, but it serves me really well. If I want to
Yeah.
do something with a computer, I can do it fast one time right now. But if I want to do something for the future, I'm going to do it in a way that's kind of um, more durable. And that tends to be in the programming languages. Actually, for the survey, this is an interesting thing related to the survey. I shared the report, and the report's a long, like 20-page report with a lot of graphics in it. But in order to make those graphics, I actually used Python. Now, in my opinion, I'm not a good Python programmer because I haven't written a lot of Python. I've written a lot of Perl, I've written tons of Perl. I've written lots of Bash, and I've written stuff that like basically like was kind of running an enterprise essentially on my Perl scripts and Bash scripts, but I hadn't written Python in that sort of context. So the entirety of the analysis for creating the graphics and stuff, I wrote in Python. And there's a link inside of the report that links you to a Google Drive where you can download my Jupyter notebook with all of the Python that I wrote in order to be able to write this report. And some of it's broken, some of it doesn't work because it's just like I was just writing, Jupyter notebook cells. But what I did was I'd like make this work and then make this work. And then I got to the point where it's like I could pivot off of things. So as an example, I have a couple of plots that I pulled up just to look at in terms of Latin America, but I actually have instructions in that Jupyter notebook about how you could take the responses and select based on different regions. There's actually a cell inside of there. So if somebody wanted to say, hey, let me see only the responses where that particular row says that they operate in Latin America, the code's there for you to do that data pivot if you want.
You can dig dive to the data itself and analyze the way you want, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so the thing is that like I could spend the rest of my life basically analyzing this 100 response. I really could. I could spend years just doing that. So I have to kind of like selectively pick stuff.
Sure.
But my idea about it, doing good analysis, is it actually empowers other people to also do good analysis, and being able to share the work is a really important thing related to that. And so again, like if you or somebody listening to this podcast at some point in the future, goes to socsurvey.com, downloads that report, it's actually soc-survey.com, downloads that report, it'll link to a Google Drive. You can get that Jupyter notebook, and all the stuff that I did, you can see it. You can see there might be mistakes in there. I mean, I tried to avoid mistakes, but there might be, right? And I actually, I was really fortunate. I had several people who I asked, hey, would you review this? They spent the time to read it. A couple other people spent the time to look at the Python code and say like, oh yeah, that looks like it's right. That looks good to me. But if I'm in a SOC and it's just this constant churn of like new alert, new alert, new alert, make a decision, make a decision, make a decision. Who's checking that work?
Exactly. It's impossible. Excellent.
Right.
So what you can talk a little bit about the technology, the tooling, right? And the process, new process that we are being bombed by new soft process like purple teaming, buzzword, adversary simulation, wargaming, a lot of process that are popping up to SOC operations and pushing the analyst perspective, okay? Because right now, okay, I have to analyze an alert, and I still have a simulation. What you can talk a little bit about this aspect?
Yeah, that's great. So two things: process, technology, but then also you're talking about the people who are involved in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything that we're building for security operations is a system comprised of multiple different systems. Okay, so it's a system of systems. It's a very standard thing to do in IT. And we actually have a lot of technology that doesn't quite work with one another quite yet, right? So we have a problem, and this is the problem of data glue. Like, what's gluing the stuff together? Fortunately, and I in the last 5 years with security um, uh, orchestration and automation tools, the SOAR type tool, that has made it more approachable for more companies to be able to glue their systems together in a way that kind of makes sense. Everybody's always been able to do it. Here, write your own code and do it, but that's not really approachable and sustainable.
And scripting.
Yeah. But so that ends up being like, yeah, we had one person who was really good at this language, and then we hired somebody else and they wanted a different language, and then we hired somebody else and they wanted a different language. The SOAR tool, the mindset of the SOAR tool is like, this thing will glue together different pieces and let you decide how to get these pieces to interact together. Okay. Related to technology, there was actually a tremendous amount of technology related questions in here. My opinion about technology, just overall opinion about technology, is we're not very good at organizing what is available to us for security operations. Like, I have a big long list of all these different things, but I don't think that we have a clear picture of everything that's necessary in order to actually make a SOC. Here's a good example. If you said to me, Chris, I've got this company over there. They want you to build a SOC. Hurry up. They only have 3 months, right? I actually have a spreadsheet, because I've written this, that is basically an enormous list of not like specific products, but product types. That list is incomplete. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's a couple hundred lines long. It's still incomplete. Like, if I bought one of everything on that list, I couldn't make a SOC out of it. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, that's a serious and fundamental problem. And not even the vendors who are selling the stuff. And I'm talking about the big vendors. Like, if I can't call Cisco or McAfee or, name your IBM or whoever, it doesn't matter. I cannot pick up the phone and say, I want a SOC. Can you deliver me a SOC? It needs to monitor
tooling package, right? Oh, I need a SOC tooling package.
I need the SOC, and everything, all of the devices, all connected to one another, all the analytical workstations, doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. I'm actually giving a talk at RSA here in a couple of months around what I'm proposing as a technology taxonomy, which is like, here's the entire cascade of all the things of what you need. Because again, even if I'm not 100% correct, me putting that out there for the public, for vendors to say, that guy's crazy, he doesn't know what he's talking about, that, for companies to say, I can't afford to buy all that stuff, fine. But it's like, I would rather give that entire picture and have you pick it apart and say, oh, you missed a thing. Great. Like, I think that is a massive value to the community to start that conversation. And I can't guarantee it. What I hypothesize will happen in the future, someone is going to take the work that I did on that, and they're going to like pivot it and say, here's our entire SOC offering. Good. That's exactly what I want. That is exactly what I want. And it's almost like I'm forcing
right?
companies' hands to do that.
Yeah.
Right?
To
Like,
standardize the process.
yes, please. Right? Yeah, exactly. Because right now I can go to, in the US, it's Home Depot and Lowe's and whatever it is. I can go to a hardware place and I can buy a component that fits into the electrical system in my home and replace it. Right? If we really want to have safety in our information systems for the long term, we need some sort of a picture of like, what's the stuff that the organization needs. And for small organizations who simply can't afford to have all that stuff, they need to have something that fits onto their computer systems that helps them to do monitoring without much overhead on their part. Otherwise, it's never going to work.
So we are talking about the standardized, right? Standardize the tooling, standardize the process, standardize the training capabilities and offering regarding the SOC, right? Nowadays, as we said in the beginning, even the capabilities about SOC are not standard. Everybody understands SOC as doing quite different things. So I think that this can include support tiny companies or small companies to understand a little bit better what is a SOC, right? If we have standards, very clear standards about it.
Yep, I think that the closest thing that's available for that right now, in terms of looking at, and again, it's a full list as opposed to what's right for you. But if you actually look at the MITRE attack framework, this is an attempt to show all the stuff that an attacker can do. So one of the things that MITRE attack framework is intended to do is to provide something which they call a defensive gap analysis. And again, the term confidence is used in their literature as well, where it says you can assess your confidence in being able to prevent or detect an adversary operating on one of these techniques and deploying this particular tactic. If you have high confidence in that, then it shouldn't really damage you very much should they bring that to your environment, right? So, but that is, I don't want standardization to be mistaken for like non-competitive or anything like that. But what I want, what I'm driving for, what I'm hopeful for, is for people to at least have a list to start from, of like, here's the stuff. And so I've organized it into like a kind of a hierarchical view. And I actually have, for the stuff that I use, I actually have product examples all the way down to like, I want an analyst workstation. And from an analyst workstation, and I'm just picking this one because I just said it a second ago, but I could use an open source version of that, where I can basically get Security Onion. I can install a whole bunch of packages on it. There's somebody who's created an analyst. It's called the Ultimate Forensics Workstation, which is built on Security Onion, which then includes stuff from like the Remnux distribution in order to have reverse engineering tools built into it. So it's like
the Logfit and Assert, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's just some hardware. Now I could also, if I want the enterprise thing, I could go look at the Samuri, Samuri Talano workstations, which start at like $15,000, but they already have software, and that all the the motherboard stuff works together. So it's like, and those workstations run up to $50,000-$60,000 for doing analysis. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but it kind of doesn't matter to me. If I have analysts doing work, they need workstations, right? And I should have that on my list of the things that I would need to buy in order to be able to build out that SOC. And that's just one example of hundreds of things like that. I need messaging apps. I need telephones. I need a SIM. I need a SOAR. I need a network intrusion detection system. I need user behavioral analytics. It's just like all this stuff. So what do we need in terms of technology? Again, people always ask me, well, like, Chris, stop listing a million things. Tell me the minimum that I need. Like, from a technology perspective, from a minimum, I need some sort of host inspection. And many people think I'm crazy when I say this, but if I had to choose between endpoint inspection and network inspection, I'd pick endpoint. I really would. Now, I don't want to have to choose. I want to look at both. Right.
Sure.
I mean, but so this is kind of the reality of what a lot of companies end up making their choices on, is some arbitrary sense of what's the minimum to be able to look at stuff. So host-based inspection, network-based inspection, the ability to then sew all that data together in what we usually consider as our SIM. And the SIM is kind of like the analytical engine from a technical perspective to piece together data from different places and say, hey, here's the thing that you should care about. Okay. And so we need something like that to make it work. Yeah.
Sure. And do you have any highlight regarding the Latin America perspective? Anything that you pulled from your survey that you can talk to Brazilian people to consider?
Yeah. So I actually I pulled out a couple of things in looking at this. What was interesting to me that I saw in the report, and let me just tell you what I'm basing this on from an opinion perspective. So I have a bunch of different plots, data charts. So one of the things that I went and looked at was in the demographic section related to security operations, where the organizations were identifying where they operate and where they have security operations. Okay, so if you, again, I have shared every single one of these charts, including stuff that isn't included in the report, and there's something like 200 different plots of data elements in the download on the Google Drive. And so something that I thought was really interesting is that in looking at the plots that were there, many of the organizations said that the organization operates in South America. Okay, so I asked two separate questions related. Actually, I asked several questions related to various regions, but one of the questions was, what region does your organization operate in? So where's your business running? And then another question was, what regions does your SOC have physical presence of operation in? Okay. And so what this is saying is actually a lot of the people. So 21, it's kind of spread across. I have to kind of add it up from this particular plot. So roughly 30 or so of the organizations said they operate, their business operates in South America. But then when I go and look at where they have security operations activity, just adding up the numbers really quickly as I'm looking at this, I see 8. So 30 of the respondents said their business operates in South America.
They have business in South America, but only 8 does operate the SOC itself in South America.
Yeah. So to me, I see this as a missed opportunity, honestly. Right? This is a good knowledge worker kind of role that I think that people could look at as a potential opportunity for bringing jobs to the region that are being missed. Okay? And let me give you another example. Based on some information, I happen to know that a bunch of large organizations do security operations out of Ireland and in and around Dublin. And one of the reasons for that is actually the Irish government invested in education for its population in order to try to capture these jobs. Right. And so I think that this is something that if, people are listening to this and think about this, it's not just about the companies which are expressly based in South America, where you can actually have an opportunity to develop these security operations. It's companies that are actually based outside and having that as a vehicle to help to drive capability and development and growth in this. And everybody in the world is looking for jobs which are personally rewarding and well-paying and necessary and feel like they're contributing and something that, I don't usually talk to people in public about what I do for work. Right. I had somebody the other day, I actually, and again, this is just personal, but it's like, I go rock climbing at a gym near where I live. And I usually go during the day. I go at odd hours and stuff because I work all the time, but it's like, I also have a lot of flexibility. And somebody asked me the other day and he said, I see you here a lot. What do you do? Like, what do you do for work? I said, I work in cybersecurity. And he's kind of like, cybersecurity. Wow. Like, that's really cool. I was like, actually, it's not cool at all. It's really not a cool thing, but it's just in the news a lot.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
It's just in the news a lot. And this
It's
is something
mainstream, right?
Yeah, it's mainstream. This is what we kind of started off about. This is like mainstream in a big way. It's not super cool. It's like lots of really nerdy, weird stuff with like me,
Chill.
But it's actually important. It's important right now, right? It's really important, right? And fortunately, for the last tens of years in our lifetime, I mean, basically, like, things have generally just worked. If I get on an airplane over here, I land on that place over there, no big issues. But unfortunately, more and more stuff is getting exposed to internet threats, and people haven't really thought about the long-term impact for that. They haven't built the monitoring and responsive capability in those new investments that they made 10 years ago. And again, like, this is something that most business decision makers don't see. Let's take again my analogy of the house. I'm going to build a house. How long does that house last for? I don't know, 50, 70 years, depends what I make it out of. I build a big skyscraper out of steel and concrete. I mean, that's a 200-year building. The information system that I put into that building, which is the brain of the building, what's the lifespan on an information system today? Roughly 3 years,
5 years,
5 years, 3 years, 5 years.
5 at the most, right?
The way we're building our durable goods today is, my refrigerator, my stove, whatever, 20, 30, 40-year lifespan with a brain that's really only supported for 5 years at the most. That's stupid, man. That's stupid. You know what I mean? Like, you're building the brain, which is arguably the most important part, as the least durable aspect of it. Right? That's what we built. This is how we just built our electrical grids. This is how we're building our our cellular infrastructure. This is how we're building our airplanes. Right? I mean, airplanes, I used to fly all the time. I don't fly anymore. But it's like, I get onto airplanes and I fly a lot. So I'm usually on early, and the video system, they reboot it. And I see a Linux kernel from like 1988.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
if the video
Start to
system,
freaking out, right?
if I don't even freak out anymore, I'm like, whatever. You know what I mean? It's like that used to bother me. I know it's the reality. I know
Mhm.
it's the things that are underpinning our global stability. You know, in all honesty, the things that are underpinning our global stability are information systems which aren't really trustworthy. And the thing that's saving the day when we have a problem is hopefully somebody's paying attention when that thing
Yeah.
starts to go wrong. And the organization that's responsible for keeping that thing running has cared enough to invest something in the ability to recover when things go bad. Like, that's what I depend on when I get on the plane. That's what, you know what I mean? That's what we depend on for the water, not having too much, you know, acid dumped into it in order to stabilize or whatever the person tried to dump into it, right? Like all of those information systems that everybody in the world depends on for food being transferred all over the place, because that's kind of how things work, right?
Yep.
That's what it's all built out of. It's all a little bit broken. And the thing that saves the day when things start to have a problem is like somebody's paying attention.
Yeah, that's true. Considering that you are talking about the world cybersecurity, right? So it's totally aligned with that aspect. What's your tips or your concern for government and mission critical environment, as you just said, like telco, financial institute, health, and military? And right now we have been, at least in Brazil, right? During the COVID, we have a lot of issues regarding the health environment, hospitals and clinics, jumping and popping around, ransom or
Yep.
hijacks, a lot of stuff.
Yep.
So what's your opinion about it?
Um, so I'm fearful of people making decisions with partial, inaccurate information. Okay. Um, so I'm hopeful that governments understand the importance of privacy of the individual. I'm hopeful that governments understand that, like, the changes that we make in laws, related to information systems have like chaotic impacts as we change things, right? And by chaotic impact, I mean a small change here can have a dramatic effect over there. Okay. Um, what I have seen, and I've talked to, you know, I've done a bunch of work inside of the U.S. government. I've talked to people who are in government agencies all around the world, right? And what I've seen is a movement toward um, audit, inspection, that sort of stuff, which I think is really good. Right. I think it's a really good thing to at least have checklists and verifications and basic things which are required. Okay. I do think it's not enough, but I do think it's also a good basis for good operational capability. Just if you're an organization and you don't have cybersecurity, but you have rock solid IT operations, you'll probably mostly be okay.
Yep.
I mean, really, like that's what the stuff that we've seen in terms of the environments. If like somebody's really all about their IT systems, even if they don't have like really strong cybersecurity operations, they'll probably notice weird stuff happening on their IT systems, which is what attackers tend to do. Okay. Um, I'm optimistic on the improvement of mobile device security. Mobile device architecture, iOS and Android are basically the only platforms that are real global players in this currently. There may be something that changes, but for now, that's enough to talk about. They release a new major operating system update basically every year, and the architecture of mobile devices is a stronger security architecture than personal computers. However, there's substantially less flexibility and personal freedom on those devices, right? So this is good from a protection perspective. It's bad from a opportunity for people to have that autonomy, right? So this is what I think is the core issue for governments, is to consider that large organizations, global organizations who deliver a platform that everybody wants to use. I think that really the most important thing for a government is to think about, how are we protecting the individual from these companies who have the opportunity to see every aspect of each individual's life, right? I have kind of a focus in mobile too. I deal with mobile a lot, and it's both amazing and frightening in the amount of information which is stored about a person on the mobile phone. Okay, so this is something that is what governments should be focusing on for the long term. Now, it's not exactly security operations, but it is the governmental oversight of
The privacy
information.
aspect, right?
Yeah, that's governance. Like that's
Yeah.
governance. Now, for government SOCs are actually in a really good position a lot of the time to be able to do coordination across a lot of different areas. The one thing that I think that governments should pay more attention to is how they have structured their hierarchy of information sharing, so that it's less about, well, I told the tier up from me and they're going to do whatever they're going to do about it. And it's more of a, let's make sense of what everybody's seeing, and everybody has a responsibility from that SOC's perspective. Because, every country, every state, every municipality, they're going to have lots of different agencies. Each one is going to have its own security operations in some form. And that's just the reality of the way most governments work. Okay. You can have some centralization, but also the different agencies are going to want to have control of their own systems. And what I've seen, and I think it's a big failure with an opportunity that is totally missed, is you could take all these different government agencies and entities, and rather than having them like firewall each other away, you could turn this into actually a really knowledgeable set of cybersecurity capabilities. Okay. So I have talked to some groups out of actually all over the place: Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central and South America, Australia, all sorts of Asian countries. I've talked to people who work for the government in basically any country that me as an American, I'm allowed to talk to people. you know what I mean? I'm actually allowed to talk to anybody. It doesn't matter. But so it's like I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating. And so what happens to a lot of people who are working in government is they tend to actually have some funding, some agency, but then they're really like structured in terms of where they can go and where they can't go. I've had the fortunate opportunity to teach classes to people. I've had people say, you know what, we're building cyber security operations for our country. We're going to take what you presented as an architecture, and this is what we're going to build. I'm just like, wow, that's a tremendous responsibility. I feel like is on my shoulders to make sure I'm absolutely right.
Yeah.
But
It's kind of a top down, right? A top down hierarchy is very complicated to have.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Very single aspect in the municipalities and the state, or at least single process, right? Single work process. I feel, but maybe this is very oriented to the political perspective, right?
Yeah,
we have a political perspective, kind of top down, hierarchy as well.
Yeah.
So this is very hard to have the different mindset and telling that the municipality has the same mindset or the same level of
Mhm.
information or
Mhm.
same level of access that the federal state, for instance, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Fair. You know, what's interesting though, is that like those smaller municipalities, the cities, the whatever, they usually know their own stuff better.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
like they can
It's
learn
easier, right?
things.
It's easier to
Yeah.
maintain
Yeah.
and to support a small asset than a big asset, right?
Exactly. And so if I have to support a big asset, like if it's my responsibility to design something to support a big asset, then what I would probably rather do is have lots of little small
Yeah.
enclaves of people who really know what they're doing, and then be able to
Divide and
coordinate
conquer, right?
among them. Well, it's actually, rather than division, it's more of that fusion of like,
Yes.
you can't break into my environment, because every little cell inside of my environment is self-defending. You've got to beat that one and 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 that one. And guess what? They're all different. And you know, like, you're
True.
not going to have the insight to understand it. Like, that's a pretty rough defensive topography to try to divide and conquer, if they already are divided but they've fused together to work
Yeah,
together
yeah,
for strength, right? And so, like, from a security perspective, the thing that fails in a lot of governments, I think, is this idea of sharing information, right? And it's threat intelligence, but it's like locally grown threat intelligence. And a lot of the way that people think about information sharing is, you've got information, good, give it to me. Thanks for sharing. And it's not that
and bye
bi-directional
bye.
sharing. Yeah, yeah. It's not that, okay, I've got something that I can give to you, and like, let's keep this going and develop this and share it. And um I've worked at a number of different US government agencies. And there was, when I was at Department of Energy, there was actually, Department of Energy is an interesting government agency, lots of different parts. Some of the parts don't really share information with one another. Some of the parts are really interested in sharing information with one another. And they actually, and this was 12, 13 years ago, they had a way that you could opt into information sharing. You could know everybody that was part of this information sharing program, and you could choose who you shared stuff with by encrypting the data to a number of different keys. So basically, you had different categories. So US Department of Energy has like power administrations for doing electrical stuff. They also have like all of the big basic science research laboratories, but then they have a whole bunch of other like university laboratories. So I could decide, you know what? This is information that I only want to send to the big labs. I'm not going to send it to the university labs. I'm not going to send it to the power administrations, because they don't really have a need to know for this specific thing. And then I, as the producer of this information, could share it with people who I thought it was relevant to, but I got to control who it was shared with. As a model, that works for a lot of people. It's like having a model where you can share that information based on the originator, the producer of it, being able to basically say, these are the people that I trust overall, but then within the group of people that I trust, here are the people that really need to know this threat intelligence, because overly sharing threat intelligence can spoil it,
Yeah.
right? And you want to coordinate with people when you're using threat intelligence for them to have time to be able to see if they really have this problem or not, to be able to do something about it before that adversary changes their methodology. Okay. So everybody knows the SolarWinds story of what happened recently. This was a broadly disseminated threat intelligence bulletin sent out to the world, right, by FireEye. I would ask you to consider, do you think FireEye shared that information with some people before they sent it to the world? I think so,
Yeah, probably.
in my opinion. right? I'm glad that they shared it with the world. I think that they did a lot of good by sharing that. And I'm glad that they did, but they're a private company who, they sell information security. So they probably worked with some um, important customers of theirs who they wanted to provide advance notice about this particular intrusion that they found. Right. So you can still do that in a coordinated fashion, but you need to figure out what that means and what it looks like and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that governments are in a really tough place in terms of doing security operations well, because they usually can't hire, they can't afford to hire the really good staff. Okay. But governments are in a good place usually because the people that they do hire are usually long-term employees. So hopefully there's some balance there that governments find. So
I see. In your opinion, what's the future of the SOC? It's related to automation, intelligent fusioning, as you said, and what more? What kind of thing that you consider to be the future of the security operations center's perspective and plan?
yep. The things that I see coming up in the near future, again, all my opinion, based on information that I've fused in my own brain, is a lot more outsourcing of monitoring capability. I think that that's a rapid proliferation of outsourcing related to that, and there will be a lot of good SOCs to do that with. But I still think that there's actually going to be a fair amount of internal monitoring as well. And I think that what's going to happen is there's going to be lots of third parties looking at information with internal sort of specialists looking at it again after that initial thing. Okay. I think that in the immediate future, basically everybody is going to be leveraging a SOAR-like tool in order to do repetitive tasks. Honestly, there's no reason for us to have analysts typing stuff in over and over again to do the same thing. And I actually, again, I've got talks on all sorts of topics, but I have a talk on this. And one of the reasons that I wrote this talk was to help people to understand how to use SOAR. And one of the things that I say is you prioritize the things that you want to orchestrate and automate based on the things that you do very often and things which require precision of execution. So my example of this is if I suspect that I have a host that's compromised, I want to contain that host. There are probably 5 or 6 different ways that an organization has at their disposal to contain the host. Host-based firewall change, network-based firewall change, process termination on the host. I can do DNS black holing. I can do, basically web proxy manipulation. I can do all these things. Why would I ask an analyst in the Security Operations Center to log into 5 or 6 different systems and type commands that analyst is unfamiliar with, when I could have a tool that gathers the information that says, based on the analysis that you're doing, you think it's this process on this workstation connecting to this external entity. Do you want me to do containment? And then the SOAR tool can basically list out 10 different options of containment. And the analyst can say, yes, 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 not sure about that one. Let's not do that one. Yes, yes, yes. Press the go button and the SOAR tool performs all of those tasks. I mean, cybersecurity containment is basically a standard IT process done in an emergency for something that we didn't expect to happen. Right? It's all just standard move, add, change stuff. So let's do it with our standard tool set. right? So this
Sure.
is something that, like, once people make sense of this, of like, okay, I've got actions, I want my analysts to be smart and take the right actions that minimize the likelihood of damage, but
Mhm.
also minimize the likelihood of them unnecessarily impacting the organization. Okay. So I need to be able to do that well. That's precision. That's the sort of thing that I'll use my SOAR tool.
I see.
The next, yeah, sorry, were you going to ask me something about that?
Yeah, just a little thing. So you're talking about using the SOAR for automate stuff, right? Automating repetitive tasks can be for an analytics perspective, right? To understanding like enrichment aspect, enrichment information, etc., or containment, right? Sometimes I understand or I listen to people considering to have SOAR to automatize whole SOC operation, the whole flow. And at least in my opinion, this is very hard because this we need to have the analyst mindset, right, to understand and to think a little bit further. And SOAR not think. SOAR is the arms, not the brain.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree with you, right? And it's one of these things where I remind people computers are good at repetitive tasks. Computers are good at being accurate in executing a thing that we want that computer to do. Computers are not yet good at fusing large amounts of information and making sense of these various information sources. The analyst should be leveraging the tools to do correlation type information, to go and aggregate other information, and they can use a tool to do that. As an example, again, another example of, your example of this is my arms. If an analyst wants to investigate a host for a potential problem, you probably know all the stuff that you want to pull back from that host already. And so you could build a portfolio of investigation tasks that an analyst can choose to do. Now, as I do that more and more, I can do more automation around that. But I want to have my SOC be this sort of learning capability where I can say, this is a repetitive task, let's automate it. And I can also say, there's value in me doing this task as an analyst, even though I could automate that task. And there's this thing that I talk about, and it's a definition that somebody else wrote. It's the paradox of automation. And the paradox of automation says, the more you automate a system, the less knowledgeable the people who you expect to save that system when it starts to go wrong become. And a fully automated system, it's highly unlikely that a person can intervene in that fully automated system because they simply don't understand all the details of it. Right? They've lost that view and visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly like you're saying, I want to keep some of this analytical work on the human being. And some of that is some manual tasks even to
Yeah.
make sure that they can continue to do it. Right. So this might even include a little bit of a notion of like a chaos engineering type of task where it's like the analyst has to go and grab that one manually. Why? Just because. Well, I mean, so that we make sure that it still is the thing that we expect. But what's related, another prediction that I have of what's related is I really do think that our machine learning capabilities are going to get better at doing outlier detection. So I talk about hunting and I talk about use cases, right? And use cases are more of that sort of like engineered sim. Here's all the stuff that we want to pull together. And when this and this and this and this happens, then we can say that this is alert worthy. Hunting is more of like, I don't really know what I'm looking for. I'm just looking to see if there's a problem. Okay. Generic descriptions, but this is kind of how I use this. But I do think that in that we don't really know what we're looking for, but we're looking for outliers. If we do a better job training our machine learning algorithms using supervised machine learning, using some sort of ongoing unsupervised machine learning, we'll get more opportunities to leverage our machine learning capability in hunting type work to the point where it's like, yeah, that's showing me stuff that I never would have thought of, but when I went and looked at it, that's actually real. Now everyone wants to call this artificial intelligence, call it whatever you want. I mean, most of it is machine learning algorithms that are doing, some sort of algorithm to look for an outlier, something which doesn't fit some sort of deviation or profile, or some sort of mathematical assessment to look for something that just doesn't conform to a curve or a line. Yeah. So I think that we're going to get more of that. And if you're in a good position to absorb it, this will be a phenomenal tool, right? I mean, imagine hunting where it's just like, here are 10 things, go look at them, tell us what's up, understand that.
We'll pre-hunt, right? We'll support the pre-hunting, for instance.
Yep. So, yep.
Excellent. Talk to me, do you have any last word, anything you want our public to consider, to think about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for making the time to talk to me. This has been really good. Hopefully there's some useful nuggets for people that are in there. I do a lot of different stuff, but I actually count myself as a very fortunate person where I have a lot of sort of self-direction and a lot of flexibility. I love hearing what people are doing in this space. So if there's something that this is kind of like a last word, it's an offer to like have the conversation about something related to this. And if there's something in that SOC survey that you're not sure about, that, you can go and look at it. If you don't have the skill set to dig into the Python, which I understand a lot of people probably don't have that skill set, that's okay too. There can be kind of a conversation around it. I really hope, though, that if there's one thing that this SOC survey inspires people to do, it's to really be analytical and show your work in the things that you're speculating on. If I can go back and say, well, here's how I think that I know that thing, it's a tremendously powerful way to conduct yourself as a professional. So I really just hope that that's something that's there. You can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on I've got a bunch of websites where I host things. If you want to read the SOC survey, it's soc-survey.com. And the other thing is, and I'll be sending it to you next year as well. I'm writing it again in 2021. So really, it would be beneficial to get a lot more people involved in sharing information related to what security operations looks like in varying regions, because I think that this is a way that globally we can actually make security operations a lot more effective, and you don't have to suffer the same pain that I had to suffer through.
Exactly.
Like you can learn from that, right? You can also make it your own, right? So it's not just like, oh, here, I'm just feeding you information. It's you taking it and turning it into something that's appropriate for you, for the place that you work, for the people who work within that place, because security means very different things to different people in different places.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it's really about making it your own and localizing it, as well as being able to fuse this into a larger picture to help everybody make things better. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. Was a pleasure to have you here on board with us. Thanks again. Obrigado, Thiago, por tudo. Pode parar aí, Thiago, se quiser.